A 3-day operation that led to the deaths of 45 Palestinians, including several high-ranking members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Israel claiming that all its objectives were met. Operation Breaking Dawn was a unique escalation in the sense that Israel was the first to strike rather than having to respond to a barrage of rockets, as on August the 5th, the IDF struck a building in Gaza, killing 10 people, including PIJ commander Taisia Jabari and a 10-year-old girl, the daughter of a PIJ militant. And after numerous more Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip, and after hundreds of rockets from the PIJ were fired into Israel, a ceasefire was agreed on Sunday night. But how futile is this ceasefire for a conflict that is not resolved? Was Israel right to have attacked Gaza first, or should it have tried to avoid the conflict altogether? What will be the political ramifications of a war that got a strong backing from the Israeli public just a few months before an election? Is Israel stuck in a never-ending conflict with Gaza?
So let's get to it. Is Israel stuck in this never-ending conflict with Gaza? Dear ladies and gentlemen, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance, and we pick up the conversation right after. So Colonel Eisen, please take the lead.
As I think about it now, there's no question whatsoever that it's a loop. It's a harsh loop, but I want to break it for a moment. You can break this loop of the endless conflict if you are willing to compromise on what most Israelis are not willing to think of with Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. As long as we continue to view the two as totally separate, yes, we're in a loop. But if we're willing to understand that they actually can work with each other, I think that we could break that loop.
And we will obviously address all this in a split second. But first, Rizaki, your take?
Well, actually, I completely agree with Colonel Eisen. That's the loop. We're choosing to be in this loop because we're refusing to go back to a political dialogue with the Palestinians, namely with the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas.
Palestinian Authority, not even a talking point in the past few days, not even playing a role. It seems we will get to that as well in a second, but last but definitely not least, Emily Schrader, your thoughts?
So I think that this operation was tremendously successful in terms of what the IDF wanted to achieve. That being said, I actually agree with my other co-panelists that this is a loop. We're definitely in a cycle. The question is what we're going to do about it.
Well, that's going to be a fascinating debate. You all agree. I'm just kidding. The interesting conversation is not just about confrontation. From this point onwards, please feel free to interact, of course. But I do want to go back to this sense of euphoria, even, I would dare to say, here in Israel. Little doubt over the tactical success from the Israeli standpoint. But if we're talking long-term strategy here, has the equation changed at all, Colonel Eisen?
The equation changed when in February Israel allowed and enabled 10,000 Gazan workers to come and work in Israel. That was the change of the equation. The last 3 days of this violent cycle of attacking Palestinian Islamic Jihad that are a terror organization and are based not just in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, that change of cycle to me is something very important, because what ended this so quickly is not necessarily the violence itself, the Israeli impact that was against Palestinian Islamic Jihad. What ended it was that Hamas did not join in, and to me that has to do with 15,000 people coming into Israel, bringing in salaries that they did not have before. So I do think that there's a change, and there's a possibility for change into the future.
Emily, is it really the sticks and carrots, quote-unquote, policy? Those civil gestures, those work permits that facilitated what we're seeing now, or is really deterrence, as it is dubbed here?
I think it's a little bit of both. When it comes to dealing with a terrorist organization, of course, I think the IDF is right to have a strong response in shutting down and deterring terrorist organizations, be it Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas or any other organization. That being said, I'm in complete agreement that what can change the status quo long term is creating a situation in which Palestinians have a profitable life within Gaza or the West Bank. I think this is a key factor to long-term peace. Short-term, I think the IDF is critical to shutting down and deterring terrorist organizations, just as we saw in this last operation.
But Ori Zaki, the term deterrence here that I personally used myself, is it even relevant here? Because the scenery, or the scenario rather, is quite clear. Those terror organizations, let it be Hamas, let it be Islamic Jihad, are recovering, rebuilding themselves, and they will hit again once they're ready. So is there really an essence of deterrence here?
Well, there is a combination of detente with Hamas, because both Israel and Hamas know that the price of a real tackle with Gaza, namely with Hamas, is much more expensive than with the small Islamic Jihad, which in a sense is also an interest of Hamas itself, because it's a competitor which always portrays itself as more devoted to the cause than Hamas itself, because Hamas is running the Gaza Strip, unlike the Islamic Jihad. But having said all that, again, the deterrence, it's everything is very tactical. The strategic step that needs to be taken is first not to try and continue the Netanyahu strategy, meaning we ignore the Judea and Samaria when we're dealing with Gaza, and vice versa. We can't really detach those two areas. There are two areas of the Palestinian people, and the address should be the Palestinian Authority. We should be dealing with the Palestinian Authority, of course, taking into account the presence of Hamas there, but we can't rely on the fact that they are detached from each other. We can't have a kind of Gaza is already a state, and let's deal with it. It won't work. We have to deal with the Palestinians, and dealing with the Palestinians, meaning dealing with this whole area, and also with the national conflict we're in.
But Colonel Eisen, can we say that this policy or notion of divide and conquer, so to speak, to make a distinction between the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and yes, I will toss into this boiling pot East Jerusalem as well, is proving to be a de facto stateless Palestinian state in terms of the connections?
What an amazing way to put it. The stateless Palestinian state. I'm going to reuse that one again.
Oh, please do. I'm humbled.
I'm going to push back on a few things that was said by my panelists right now. I was the government spokesperson. I was the Prime Minister's international media advisor when Hamas took over in the Gaza Strip. And to say in that sense, that generality of it's Netanyahu, and that doesn't mean I'm for or against Netanyahu. The policy of the Israeli government towards the Gaza Strip was defined by that Kadima government in 2007, and the issue is that it hasn't changed since, meaning for the last 15 years, Israel has tried a deterrence policy.
Was also dealing with negotiating with Palestinians.
No, he most definitely, as I was at the time, it was an even harsher policy in those first years, where it was to isolate the Hamas and to make sure that the Gaza Strip was declared by the government of the State of Israel under Olmert, the entire Gaza Strip, as a hostile entity. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad were already terror organizations.
Right,
the question was what to do with the Gaza Strip.
Also on Gaza. He didn't detach them.
And again,
as
for 15
entities.
years, as I said, I mean, I agree with you at the end of it that in the 15 years that policy did not change, meaning the isolation of the Gaza Strip, including the almost doubling in the amount of people there, the continuation of the ruling by Hamas has not shown that through deterrence that they stop, or through, in that sense, if you ask carrots and sticks, if that stops. It doesn't work that easily. There is no simple resolution. We're sitting here, but there's no question to my mind that the policy of the last 15 years has to change, because we're in a loop, because it isn't going anywhere. And that connection of reconnecting the Gaza Strip back to the West Bank is a challenge that, as much as we want as Israelis to say it's not about us, it's about them, it's about Hamas, Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas, we have a pretty big job in that sense to be able to facilitate in some way that reconnection. Without reconnecting, it will be a loop.
So can we say, in a sense, that this entire operation is somewhat paving the way of giving a kosher stamp to or on Hamas? The historical perspective here is crucial. Is Hamas on its way to become the PA and Islamic Jihad on its way to become Hamas, the new bad boy in town, if you will, Emily?
I'm not sure that I would go as far as to say that. I think that something that's missing from the conversation here, I do agree that Israel has an important role to play in connecting the West Bank and Gaza. However, we can't have that conversation without also acknowledging and recognizing the fact that you have a major problem in the West Bank with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas to this day. If a byproduct of this operation is that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are willing to work together more and to come to the negotiating table and speak with Israel in the long term, then great. That's a fantastic byproduct of it. But we can't ignore the fact that there is a rivalry going on. They hate each other more than they hate us. So this has been an ongoing conflict for many, many years. And part of the problem and the challenge from Israel's side is that we are not supposed to be speaking to Hamas directly. We're supposed to be speaking with our so-called partner for peace, the Palestinian Authority, which frankly doesn't have the mandate to make peace or to make any long-term decisions over the Palestinian people because they're not in control of what's happening in Gaza. So there's a whole other factor going on here. It's not as simple as something that Israel can do alone.
So Uri, before we head to a quick break, if an Israeli prime minister picks up the phone and wants to dial to the leader of the Palestinians, is he calling Ramallah or Gaza?
Definitely is calling Ramallah. The fact that Mahmoud Abbas is the head of the PLO brings him to a situation where he is the recognized leader of the Palestinian people. This is very strong in the Palestinian, narrative, and of course the fact that he's weakened now makes him not fit to this position that he's in. But if we'll empower him by giving that call, then he'll be able to negotiate with us. And I think we're losing the time with Abbas, who is, at the end of the day, someone who doesn't believe in violence, who wants peace based on the 67 borders. And I don't know what happens after he's gone.
Colonel Eisen, before we take a break, can a lame duck like President Abbas actually do something, considering Jerusalem would want to?
My short time, and I will say sadly, no. I absolutely do not see Mahmoud Abbas being the one who's going to make that big decision.